Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Matthews. I'm here from Whole Education. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We're going to start in just a moment to make sure that we maximise our time and make sure that we are starting on time. Before we do, I'll just quickly go through the format of today's session with you. So to start off with, we will be hearing from Louisa Reeves, who is with us today from ICAN. And then at the end, there will be 10 minutes for you to ask any questions that you have directly to Louisa, and we can have a bit of a discussion about her presentation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Louisa Reeves. She is the Lead Communications Officer at the Children's Communication Charity of ICAN. So I'm going to go over and share her screen now and pass over to her.
Hello everybody, I hope you can hear me okay and you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Louisa.
Okay, that's great. All right, so as Hannah said, my name is Louisa Reeves. I'm a speech and language therapist by background, and I work for ICAN, which is a children's communication charity. What I'm going to try and do today is to make some links for you between speech, language and communication needs and oracy, and how often oral approaches in schools can break down and become problematic to actually implement, and that can be because of underlying speech, language and communication needs. So just to try and draw some links for you. So I don't know whether you will have heard of ICAN, and I can't see you all, so you might all be nodding and saying move on, but just for those who may not have heard of us, we're a communication charity, as I've said, and we have a very broad mission, which is to support all children's speech, language and communication needs, and that's really ranging from children who are developing typically to children who have very specific special needs. And we do that in a number of different ways. We do that through awareness raising, so we do quite a lot of publications. We write in the professional press and the national press. We have people who've been on radio and television talking about the issue of children's communication. We have a website, two websites in fact, ICAN and Talking Point, which have a great deal of information for parents and for professionals about children's development of communication skills. We deliver evidence-based solutions, and I'm going to talk about some of those for you today. And we also run 2 residential special schools for children with very complex speech, language and communication needs. So why is it an issue? This graphic is to give you some indication of the scale of the difficulty that some children have in some areas of the UK. So we know from research that poor language skills are associated with living in areas of deprivation. Statistically, children and young people are over twice as likely to have a problem with language and communication if they come from those areas. And those of you who work in schools where you're drawing your children from areas of social deprivation will probably recognise this 50% figure, and particularly in terms of reception and early years. And then 1 in 10 of these children will have a more severe difficulty, which is likely to need some long-term support. And at ICAN we tend to differentiate between these 2 groups of children, and so there's a larger group of children who have not had the opportunity to develop their language and communication skills, but can do given the opportunities to catch up, and there are other children for whom language and communication is more of an intrinsic difficulty as part of their own developmental makeup. And those children are likely to need more specialist support over a longer term. So this is my husband's Valentine's Day card this year, and the context is that we've just got an allotment. So I put this card up because I wanted to kind of illustrate how complex language is and how it has multiple meanings and is very layered, and it can go wrong. So there are lots of different ways in which language and communication can go wrong, and there are lots of things that we can do about that. I'm going to try and cover some of those things in the next 20 minutes. Particularly, I'm going to look at areas such as active listening. I'm going to talk about vocabulary, about narrative, about social and behavioural uses of communication, and about higher level language use and inferencing. And I've chosen those because those are the main areas in which children and young people can struggle in school, and particularly by secondary school, these difficulties might be hidden and they might manifest themselves in different ways. So we quite often find young people with language difficulties are beginning to disengage from education by secondary school, and they make poor academic progress. So I'm going to go through these main areas quite briefly. I'm hoping to offer you a few kind of quick wins and strategies that you can use, and I'm going to signpost some further support that I can provide. So what is it, and why do we have so many words for it? It's a complex area. It's also very deeply ingrained in adult humans. It's a very kind of, we are the only species that has this capacity for language and communication in quite such a sophisticated level. And because it becomes an instinctive competence for us as adults, it's often quite hard to break down the individual components and to think about what might actually be going wrong in terms of the difficulties that children and young people are having. So I put this slide up just to show a few of the different words for what we're talking about today. So as I've said, I'm a speech and language therapist. I talk about speech, language and communication. If you're based in a secondary school, you may well talk about oracy or oral language skills. If you're in a primary school, you might talk about spoken language. It used to be called speaking and listening. And if you work in early years, it's communication and language. So we can pull apart some of this terminology. I could probably spend the next 20 minutes just talking about the different meanings of the words in this slide. So this is the slide just to give you a little bit of a taster about some of the evidence and the research that we've pulled on to develop some of our approaches and our interventions, and as the basis of the publicising of oral and language and communication issues. So it really matters to get language skills right, absolutely from the start. They're a huge predictor. You can see here that they're a predictor at the age of 2 in terms of children's ability to cope well when they start school with issues with academic subjects like reading, like maths and like writing. And the impact of early language goes right through to GCSEs and on to higher education. So if we can get language and communication skills right for children in the very early days, particularly when they're just starting school or perhaps just starting in secondary school, we can really help them to optimise their educational opportunities and to develop into mature and confident communicators. If you're interested in research in this area, on our website we have a series of talk papers which are collations of all the available evidence in particular areas. So there's one on early years, there's one on primary, There's one on mental health, one on secondary. So you can have a look at our website to get some more information on that. So this visual just illustrates really how many children have really quite significant speech, language and communication needs. And I put this slide up really to illustrate the difference really between different types of special educational need. We often find that children who have autism or ADHD or dyslexia attract a lot of attention and resources, whereas in fact it can be a higher proportion of children in the classroom who have speech, language and communication needs. And we're aware in developing this graphic that there are kind of overlapping issues. Language and communication can run as a thread through all of these different difficulties that children may have. But it does, I think the figures in terms of the scale of the problem help to illustrate why an oracy approach is sometimes a challenge to establish in a school, but also how very vital it is to establish an oracy approach so that you can really get at the heart of why children may be struggling with their learning. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is active listening. So listening is a learned behaviour. It's not like hearing. So most babies are born with adequate hearing skills, but some children don't develop listening skills adequately or don't develop enough in order to be able to cope in school. And active listening is also a behaviour that needs to be reinforced, and sometimes it needs to be reinforced a lot. So children and young people need reminding to listen. And that might be as simple as using their name before you speak to them, just to cue them in. And there are lots of external distractions. So in this Dilbert cartoon, you can see the external distraction here. And this happens a lot in my household with my teenage children. But in school, we also need to be aware of internal distractions. So children and young people who are perhaps very anxious, they didn't get enough sleep, they're worried about tensions at home, all of that will interfere with their ability to listen actively and to learn. It can be as simple as not having had breakfast or you know, being worried about how they're going to get home. So we need to be aware of both external and internal distractions that can interfere with listening. So some of the strategies that we look at in our resources are ways of giving children and young people some little techniques they can use in order to monitor their own comprehension. So we might give them some little phrases like these to use, particularly with younger children. You can cover the good listening behaviours, so good sitting, good looking, let's all think about the same thing. But we need to be very aware that those are indicators of good listening. They're not actually listening in themselves. And we all know that somebody can be sitting very still and looking at us, but not actually listening. So we use these to develop some independent skills amongst children and young people. And that can go right up through to secondary school. So children and young people in secondary school will need some reminders of what good listening behaviours are, and they should be able to understand and have some strategies to use if they have not understood what's been said. And sometimes just practicing these clarification phrases and making an environment in the classroom where it's okay to say that you didn't understand or that you didn't hear is very useful for children, and that will reduce their anxiety about not understanding something. So if they feel quite confident to ask and they can get another explanation, and they also understand that it's not their fault if they didn't hear or if somebody's talking too quickly, and that it's okay to indicate that. And those are really important strategies. We've drawn these from some research by Dollahan and Caston, which goes actually all the way back to 1986, but about developing children's internal clarification phrases so that they can use ones to support their active listening. So I'm going to move on now very briefly to looking at vocabulary. So vocabulary, if we think about the slide on the research, is one of the biggest differentiators in how well children are going to do in school. Children coming into school with a wide vocabulary are at a huge advantage. And not only will they find it much easier to learn new words because they can build on their already strong base, but it also shows they're likely to have been exposed to a range of different experiences and been spoken to a lot at home, and that sets them up for their journey through school. And we know that vocabulary becomes increasingly more specialised and more challenging as we go through the key stages in education. So this is a way of looking at how to develop children's ability to learn new words. We have a focus in our resources on Tier 2 words, so process words that are used across the curriculum. So those are words like discuss, evaluate, describe, summarise. They're often the words that we assume that children will know, and we may concentrate on teaching the subject-specific specialist words, but we often forget to look at these more processy words. So this slide here is illustrating a word magic activity that comes from our communication cookbook and in our talk-based intervention, and it draws on two broad strategies which we use to learn new vocabulary. So we teach meaning information, the semantic information about a word or a concept, and we also need to look at the phonological makeup. And that idea of the sounds in words together with the meaning combine to help us all, including adults, to learn new words. And the more exposure we have to a new word, the more we hear it being used in context and the more we know about it, the easier it will be to be able to learn and to recall it. So this is a slide of a similar sort of resource, but one that we've developed for use in Talk About Talk Secondary. So the idea is similar, but it's using more written cues than pictorial prompts. And a glossary like this can be produced quite easily and be in the back of a subject book, and students could use it when they come across any unfamiliar words. So again, it's about developing self-help strategies for young people to use. So this is a quote by Robert McCluskey, who's an American author, which I really enjoy. Narrative skills are really important because they don't just underpin written skills, but because we as humans, we need to be able to tell stories, we need to be able to get across what we want to say, we need to share our experiences and our views. And to do all that, children and young people need to be able to sequence their ideas, they need to structure their sentences using appropriate vocabulary, and they need to be able to use a range of different grammatical structures. So again, I have a couple of resources just to share with you here. One is about having a structure particularly useful in primary. So stories have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have an end. And a visual is often used for that, so you can have a story path or a story mountain. And the key components in that are the who, what, when and where, what happened and how did it end. And you can also have discussions about how people feel as part of the story. And children need to be able to recognise that all the components of the story are in place and to spot if something's missing, and then share how they can make stories and they can make stories together in the classroom, and also include everyday stories of things that they do, because we all tell stories. You know, we get into the staff room at break and we tell the story of what we did at the weekend or what we did that evening, or an incident that happened in the classroom, and these are all stories that we use to kind of share our experiences with other people to form friendships and relationships. And here is another visual display. Again, this is a bit more complicated, a bit more complex visually, but also quite simply laid out in terms of the different elements of a narrative that perhaps would be needed at secondary. So because the requirement is more challenging, the visual support needs to keep pace with that. And again, this is taken from the ICAN secondary talk resource, and these resources are available through the Black Sheep Press, if anybody wants to have a look at those. So I put in a little bit about group work here in terms of the sort of social communication skills that are required for group work. And quite often when schools adopt an oracy approach, they put people, children and young people, into groups to work together. But being put in a group, even being put into a pair, can be quite a challenge to some. So there are lots of skills involved in paired and group work. You have to be good at listening, at turn taking, at narrative. You have to have a shared purpose, be able to keep on track, and you have to share and understand vocabulary. It's not just a question of putting, say, talkative, confident children with less talkative and confident children, because you need to actually be quite skilled to support someone else's communication. And children, particularly young children, will not necessarily have those skills. So what does support group work? Well, structure, controlled practice, maybe starting with pairs, and actually deliberately teaching children strategies for how to interact and how to include others. And you can give children and young people roles and start with a very simple task. So actually what they're practicing is that group work rather than also taking on a challenging piece of work at the same time. So you can also practice things like having a 1-minute talk on a topic. So you can give children a topic, butter or margarine, which is best, and then practice a little bit of discussion about that, taking in your roles. And this is another resource that would support that kind of activity. So very simple here, a few pointers and a conclusion. And young people, again in secondary school, can use this as a bit of a crib sheet for when they're then giving an oral presentation. Okay, so finally I'm going to talk just very briefly, because I'm conscious of time moving on, about communication and higher level skills. So we've seen in this very brief snapshot there's an awful lot going on when we start to unpick oracy and language and communication, and a huge area that's often very challenging for children with language and communication difficulties are these higher level skills. So that's including skills such as inferencing, reasoning, memory, processing, logic, and they're kind of illustrated here as a lurking under the surface sort of difficulty, or to be more accurate, they're what the skills that aren't there when you look under the surface skills. And again, towards the end of primary and into secondary, children and young people may have developed quite, on the surface, quite good strategies to mask the problems they have with this higher level processing. But obviously as the curriculum gets more demanding and they're needing to be able to use reasoning and inference much more, that's when things can start to become unravelled and the gaps show. So the sorts of strategies that are used in secondary, such as this point evidence explain, can be a way of supporting children and young people, but they may need some help with those individual elements, and they might use benefit from some sort of visual framework to support that, and from breaking down those different elements and looking at them in terms of worked examples, so that you can have visual displays of good examples of how these different elements work and then how they fit together in order to develop a reasoned argument. The last bullet point on here, which is about using the same approach across the school, actually applies to all of these strategies and tips. So if you are going to use visual support, perhaps for language or any of the other strategies that I've talked about today, having those consistently developed and presented across the school will really help children and young people when they move either from lesson to lesson or up through the year groups. Okay, so I hope the ideas that I've shared really briefly with you today will be helpful. If you want to know any more about where I've just drawn these resources from, or any of the information that I've talked about, this is the link for our website, and I've just put up some of the logos of the training strategies and the resources that we use. So one of the key things I'd just like to say finally that you can do to support children and young people with their language and communication is to really be aware of what helps them and where they need support, and to help them to develop that awareness. So the more awareness they have of their own strengths and areas where they need support, the more likely they are to be able to develop some positive coping strategies, and the more able they are to take those strategies with them and to communicate those to other adults as they go up through school. Okay, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Louisa. I think we will all have found that really relative and really interesting, and it was wonderful to have some really quick takeaways from today's webinar as well. So thank you again. What I'm going to do now is just go through each of our participants, and I'll just say your name and unmute you for a moment. So if you have a question, feel free to ask. If you don't have a microphone that's working, it might be easiest for you to type in the chat, and Louisa or I can pick that up for you. So I'll start with Alice, if you have a question. Hello, Alice. Alice, we can't hear you, so if you do have a question, can you please go down to the chat section at the bottom and just write that through to us. I will now move on to Deborah. Hello, Deborah.
Hello.
Hi, Deborah. Did you have a question for Louisa?
No, I don't at the moment. Thank you. Sorry, I got held up, so I came in a little bit late.
That's no problem at all. Deborah, what we'll do is we will be putting this webinar on our YouTube channel, so I'll email everybody here today out a link to that once it's up so you can catch up on it.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all. Thanks, Deborah. Karen, I'm coming over to you next. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Karen. Did you have a question for Louisa?
No, I think she's covered quite a lot of things. I've been making notes as she's gone along. So, but no, I think that was very informative.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, Karen. Rachel, did you have a question for Louisa? Oh, Rachel, I'm just getting a bit of background noise from you there. So if you did have a question for Louisa, if you go down to the chat section down the bottom, then Louisa or I can pick that up. So I just have a question through from Alice. So Louisa, this says, we use PicToy packs to support children. What do you think of these?
Sorry, which story packs?
PicToy?
Pictory.
Yes, I think that may be what it's supposed to read.
Okay, I'm afraid I don't know what those are actually, Alice, so I can't be of much help, but if they're a kind of visual support that follows a similar kind of structure in terms of narrative, so the who, what, when, why sort of sequence, then they probably will be appropriate to use. And again, I guess what I would also add is, do you use them consistently across the school?
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Louisa. Louisa, I think at the moment that's all of the questions that we have. So I might just take a minute now to flag up some events that are happening in the Whole Education Network that you can potentially get involved with. So the first big one that is coming up quite soon is our summer conference and celebration of practice. So this is on the 23rd of June, and this will be with Shyland Research School in Birmingham. The other thing that you may have noted is that we're currently asking for nominations of great practice that you've seen within the network, and we'll be having a celebration dinner on the 22nd of June, also in Birmingham. Also coming up, we have 2 webinars. So next week we have an assessment webinar, which is for Key Stage 2 teachers and high school teachers. And then further on down the track, on Wednesday the 26th of April, we have a Maths Mastery webinar that is for primary school teachers. All of these will be emailed out to you. I will also email out contact details for Louisa and a link to our YouTube channel so as you can see a copy of today's webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So my email address is hannah@wholeeducation.org.